The night had settled over Willow Creek like a heavy curtain, thick with the weight of an unseen presence. The moon, barely visible through a veil of thin clouds, cast a muted glow over the sleepy town, bathing its quiet streets in silvered shadows. From the porch of my cottage, I could feel it. The strange pulse in the air, the subtle shiver of something out of place. The wind, usually a gentle companion, had stilled as if holding its breath. Even the crickets, those constant creatures of the evening, had fallen silent. I tugged my woolen shawl tighter around my shoulders, my fingers twitching with the unsettled energy that seemed to hang in the air, thick and heavy. Willow Creek was a town known for its unhurried pace, its predictability. Time seemed to stretch out here, to slow down, and people took comfort in the mundane rhythms of life. But tonight was different. In the distance, a flicker of light caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a trick of my tired mind, an illusion cast by the dim light of the moon. But no, there it was again. The unmistakable glint of fire, or perhaps lanterns, far beyond the hills that marked the edge of town. A collection of lights clustered together, like a constellation that had fallen to earth. My breath caught in my throat. The traveling carnival. The one they'd all whispered about. The one that arrived without warning, bringing with it an odd mix of excitement and dread. "Curious, isn't it?" I murmured aloud, more to myself than anyone else. My mind immediately dismissed the thought. There had always been talk of such strange happenings. The arrival of a carnival that seemed to appear overnight. But I was a skeptic. I'd never put stock in such superstitions. It was just coincidence, I told myself. Maybe it was an annual event no one had bothered to announce. Still, there was something about this time that felt different. Something I couldn't quite place. I turned away from the sight, stepping back into the warmth of my home. The fire in the hearth crackled, its orange glow casting dancing shadows on the walls. Yet, despite the familiar comfort, I couldn't shake the pull of the unknown. My curiosity, that insatiable drive that both my students and peers knew well, had been awakened. It gnawed at me like an itch I couldn't reach. I would go. I'd take a brief look and return to my evening as if nothing had happened. If only to prove to myself there was nothing strange about it. Nothing at all. I glanced toward the clock, just past 9. I grabbed my coat from the hook by the door, my boots clicking on the wooden floor as I stepped outside. The cool air kissed my face, sharp and fresh. The sky above was a soft velvet, dotted with stars that seemed to twinkle like they were whispering secrets. The path leading into town felt different tonight. The gravel beneath my boots seemed almost alien, as though the earth itself were aware of the carnival's arrival. I quickened my pace, driven by a mix of skepticism and an increasing sense of unease, that prickling sensation creeping up my neck. As I walked toward the town square, the lights in the distance grew brighter, calling to me. The air smelled faintly of something sweet, caramel apples, popcorn, but also something more unsettling, like the scent of damp earth or decay. A smell that didn't belong in the clean, crisp air of a small rural town. My pace quickened further, driven by that odd mixture of curiosity and dread. And then, as I rounded the corner of Willow Creek's narrow main street, it came into full view. The carnival. It was unlike any I had seen before. Its tents towered impossibly high, striped fabric stretched taut against the night sky, shimmering with an eerie iridescence. Lanterns lined the pathways, casting long shadows that twisted unnaturally. The wind shifted, and I caught sight of the Ferris wheel rising high above the rest of the carnival, its skeletal frame moving silently in the distance. The carnival's lights pulsed in rhythmic, hypnotic patterns, beckoning me closer. They seemed alive. A soft, melodic tune floated on the breeze, a haunting lullaby that seemed to come from nowhere. It was a tune I couldn't place. The melody made my pulse quicken and my thoughts scatter. It was beautiful, yes, but there was something off about it, something wrong. A dream teetering on the edge of nightmare. My steps faltered as I approached the entrance. The familiar scent of popcorn and sugar intensified, blending with something heavier, almost metallic. The gates loomed ahead, wrought iron twisted into strange shapes, casting long, dark shadows. And there, just beyond them, stood a figure watching me approach. He wore a crimson coat, the fabric rich and vibrant, but it seemed to absorb the light around him, turning the very shadows into part of his being. His tall top hat obscured his face, but his lips were visible, thin, too perfect, and impossibly wide. His smile never wavered as I drew closer, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of his hat. And yet, somehow, I felt the weight of his gaze. "Welcome," he said, his voice a deep, smooth timbre that sent a strange thrill through my chest. It was the kind of voice that made you feel both invited and warned at the same time. "To the Shadow Carnival." The words settled in the air like smoke, curling around my mind, tempting me to step forward. I hesitated. Something was terribly wrong, but I was determined to maintain my composure. I was no stranger to strange events. I had read the books, studied the folklore, and dismissed every tale of things beyond human understanding. Still, as I stepped closer to the gates, the ringmaster's lips parted once more, revealing a smile that grew impossibly wider. "You should come inside," he said. "We have been waiting for you." And just like that, I felt it. The undeniable pull of something dark, something ancient, tugging at the core of my being. I couldn't explain why, but I knew, in that moment, that nothing would be the same once I crossed that threshold. I took one last glance behind me, at the quiet town I had known my entire life. The streets were empty now, the familiar sounds of nightfall stilled. The choice had been made. I stepped forward, entering the carnival grounds, and the gates swung closed behind me with a final, resounding click. The moment I crossed the threshold into the carnival grounds, something changed. The air around me thickened, like the night itself was being swallowed by shadows. I could hear the faint hum of distant laughter, the creaking of old rides, and the soft clinking of carnival music hanging in the air like a strange perfume. Sweet and intoxicating, yet somehow suffocating. Each step I took into the heart of the carnival felt like I was walking deeper into a dream that didn't belong in the waking world. The ground beneath my boots was smooth, unnaturally so. It felt as though the very earth had been paved with purpose. My gaze flicked over the stalls and tents, which stretched impossibly high, their colors vibrant against the night sky, but distorted, faded, yet glaring in a way that made my head ache. I shook the discomfort from my mind. It was only my imagination, I told myself. It had to be. The sweet scent of candied apples and freshly popped corn grew stronger, masking something else. Something rank, sour, that clung to the edges of my senses. It threatened to break through the pleasant facade of the carnival. I blinked, trying to clear my thoughts, but the smell remained, curling like smoke in the back of my throat. Ahead of me, a fire breather stood before a crowd, his fiery breath lighting up the darkened sky. The flames danced in unnatural hues, blue and violet, flickering too high for comfort, as if they were more than just fire. My pulse quickened. The man's form shimmered, his body flickering in and out of solidity with each breath of fire. Yet no one seemed to notice. The crowd stood entranced, their faces glowing in the reflected flames, their eyes wide, their expressions a strange mix of awe and fear. They laughed, but there was a tremor in their voices, something off-key about their joy. My stomach tightened. I had seen fire breathers before, but never like this. Never with such a strange and dangerous energy. Something was wrong with the way they moved, the way the flames didn't behave as fire should. "Do you like the show?" A voice suddenly interrupted my thoughts. I whipped around, startled, only to find a tall figure standing beside me, as if he had materialized from thin air. He was draped in a scarlet coat. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his tall hat, but I could see his lips, thin, wide, stretching into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The ringmaster. There he was, standing in front of me, waiting for my acknowledgement. I had been so absorbed in the fire breathers act that I hadn't even noticed his approach. "You've already met the fire breather," the ringmaster said, his voice soft but carrying a strange weight. It was inviting, yet menacing. Each word carefully crafted, each phrase a veiled threat. "But there are many more attractions to see, my dear." I narrowed my eyes, trying to assess him. But the ringmaster's presence seemed to distort everything around him. He didn't quite fit into the carnival. It was as if he were a shadow, a being who had slipped between dimensions, here but not fully present, his form flickering at the edges of my vision. "I'm not sure I'm interested in seeing more," I replied, my voice firm but betraying a hint of unease. "I don't trust this place." His smile widened, a slow, predatory curve that sent a shiver down my spine. "Trust? Trust is a rare commodity, especially here, but curiosity is a different thing altogether." Before I could respond, the sound of an organ played in the distance, slow, mournful, curling around the edges of my mind like a haunting memory. The tune was soft at first, but soon it grew louder, filling the air with an eerie, hypnotic cadence. I couldn't help but be drawn toward it. My gaze shifted toward a grand tent at the far end of the grounds. Its entrance was flanked by towering figures in carnival attire, each one staring ahead with dead eyes, their faces frozen in grotesque smiles. "That is the Hall of Mirrors," the ringmaster said, his voice now a whisper that vibrated in the air around me. "It's a place of revelations, where you can see yourself as you truly are." My chest tightened. I didn't want to know what that meant. "I think I've seen enough," I said, turning away. But the ringmaster's hand shot out, light as a whisper, yet unyielding. His fingers grazed my arm, sending a sharp jolt through my body. "It's only just begun, Miss Reeves." His touch lingered in my mind, a shadow that would not leave. He hadn't touched me with force, yet I felt it as if his fingers had left a mark on my very soul. I recoiled, but I couldn't pull myself away from his gaze. His eyes, black as pitch beneath the shadow of his hat, seemed to hold an entire universe in their depths, endless, unknowable, and yet oddly familiar. "You should see the mirrors, Miss Reeves," the ringmaster continued, his voice dripping with a languid sweetness that made my skin crawl. "You will understand everything once you do." The crowd around us continued to move, blissfully unaware of the strange exchange taking place. I could hear the laughter of children, the merry shrieks of carnival goers, but it all seemed muted, distorted, like a distant memory played on a broken record. Something wasn't right. I turned back to the ringmaster, my mind racing. "What do you want from us?" I demanded, my voice sharp now, though uncertainty laced my words. The ringmaster tilted his head, his smile never faltering. "Want? Oh, Miss Reeves, it's not about want, it's about what is inevitable." Before I could respond, a scream split the air. A piercing, blood-curdling sound that echoed from every corner of the carnival. The crowd froze, their faces turning toward the source. But there was no movement, no panic, just a stillness that made my blood run cold. The ringmaster's smile stretched wider, a slow, deliberate curve that seemed to pull the darkness closer. "It's begun," he whispered, his voice filled with strange satisfaction. "The game has begun, Miss Reeves, and you've already played your part." My heart hammered in my chest as the air around me thickened. It felt as if the entire carnival had inhaled and was holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone. I looked around, but the world seemed to spin, warped, unreal, like a funhouse mirror turned upside down. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the scream stopped. The crowd resumed their movements as if nothing had happened, puppets in a trance. I stood frozen, my legs rooted to the ground. The ringmaster's figure, now nothing more than a shadow among shadows, was still there, watching me, and for the first time, I felt it. The thing I had not believed in before. Fear. My pulse hammered in my ears as I stumbled forward, still rattled by my strange encounter with the ringmaster. The air around me had thickened, pressing against my skin, and the carnival that had once appeared so colorful and lively had transformed before my eyes. What had been a bustling spectacle now felt suffocating, twisted, as though the very fabric of reality was being warped by some unseen force. Every laugh, every cheer seemed wrong, strained, brittle, like a mask clinging to a broken face. I couldn't say why I kept walking, why I didn't just turn and flee. Something deep within me, something ancient and primal, urged me onward. I had to understand. I had to see what this carnival truly was. The lure of its mystery, its darkness, was a pull I couldn't escape. A soft, rhythmic drumming reached my ears, echoing like the pulse of some great beast. I scanned the crowd, trying to pinpoint the source. The people around me moved in waves, their faces blissfully unaware, their bodies swaying to a rhythm I couldn't hear. I fought my way through the dense crowd, my gaze sharp, scanning for any sign of the performers. The drumming grew louder, drawing me closer, like a breadcrumb trail, and then I saw it. A massive tent loomed ahead. Its entrance was flanked by two figures, so still, so perfectly motionless, that at first I thought they were just part of the decoration. They were tall, gaunt figures dressed in tattered circus attire, their faces painted in grotesque masks of porcelain white, their eyes wide and glassy, fixed on nothing. But as I drew closer, my blood ran cold. They weren't human at all. Their skin shimmered unnaturally, almost translucent, like something not meant to be touched. Their limbs were too long, too thin, like twisted marionettes. I shuddered, but my gaze couldn't look away. Their presence was hypnotic, their silent, unsettling gaze pulling something deep within me, something I couldn't explain. With a sharp intake of breath, I passed them and entered the tent. The atmosphere inside was a stark contrast to the outside world. Flickering lanterns cast a pale, sickly light over the performers gathered on the stage, each one a bizarre distortion of nature. The music that accompanied the drumming was low, haunting, the strings vibrating in a way that felt more like an intrusion on my thoughts than a song. The air was thick with the scent of dust and stale perfume, sweet yet oppressive. The performers moved in ways that defied reason. One woman balanced high above on a tightrope, but her movements were anything but graceful. She swayed and twisted like a marionette on strings, her arms bending at unnatural angles as she jerked herself along the rope. Her face, once beautiful, was now a blank canvas of muted colors, her eyes glassy and unseeing. Every time she shifted her weight, the rope creaked, the sound reverberating through my bones, as if it were a living thing. My stomach churned. This wasn't just performance, this was grotesque, unnatural. I tried to rationalize it. It had to be a trick, a feat of some kind. But a deep discomfort gnawed at my gut, telling me otherwise. Something far darker was at play here. The crowd remained mesmerized, their faces slack with adoration, their eyes locked on the performer. A boy, no more than 10, stood beside me, his mouth agape, his hands trembling with excitement as he clutched a piece of candy. My blood ran cold when his gaze flickered toward me, as if he saw me for the first time. His eyes were wide, too wide, as if he were seeing something behind me, something that made him unable to look away. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly tore my gaze away from him and looked toward the next act. A fire breather stood at the center of the stage. Flames curled from his mouth in vivid, otherworldly hues: blue, green, purple. The fire didn't behave like fire should. It didn't flicker or dance. Instead, it expanded and contracted like the breath of some great beast, swirling around him as if alive. His face, like the others, was painted, but the features were sharp, angular, as if carved into his skin. His eyes were deep black, unblinking. He didn't seem to see the audience, yet, somehow, he knew we were all there, every one of us. The flames he breathed were not flames at all. I could see the shadows within them, pulsing with dark energy. The heat radiating from them didn't seem to come from the fire itself. It seemed to come from the very air around us, crackling with a force that made my skin tingle with unease. The flames danced to their own rhythm, as if they were more than a mere trick of the light. I looked away, unwilling to watch any longer, but my gaze fell on the next performer, a contortionist, her body a twisting maze of limbs. She bent and folded herself in ways that defied the human body, twisting until her joints popped and cracked like dry twigs. Each contortion echoed in my chest, the sound of bone breaking reverberating through my very ribs. Her face was obscured beneath a flowing black mask, but I could feel her eyes burning through the cloth. Her movements were too perfect, too precise. Each bend, each twist calculated in a way that made my blood run cold. I could feel the suffocating weight of the air growing heavier around me as she folded her body in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Every fiber of my being screamed to turn and run, but my legs refused to move. It was as though they were caught in an invisible web spun by the performers themselves. I was drawn to them, compelled to watch, unable to tear my gaze away from their grotesque, unsettling acts. The music swelled, a cacophony of strings and drums that seemed to echo from the very walls of the tent. Behind me, I felt it. The presence of something, someone, lurking in the shadows. The ringmaster's voice, smooth and deep, echoed in my mind, though he was nowhere to be seen. "You see, Miss Reeves," his voice vibrated in the air around me, "they are not mere performers. They are the essence of the carnival. Their bodies bend and twist, their souls stretched and contorted to fit the needs of the spectacle. And you are part of it now, whether you understand it or not." My stomach turned. His words weighed on me like a vice. This wasn't a carnival, this wasn't entertainment. This was something far worse, something ancient, something hungry. As the contortionist's body folded into itself, disappearing into the shadows beneath the stage, the heavy hand of realization gripped my heart. I wasn't just a spectator here. I was the prey, and the carnival was closing in around me. I stumbled backward, my breath shallow, my mind racing to keep up with the overwhelming tide of confusion and fear. The carnival, which had seemed like no more than an unsettling curiosity when I first arrived, something out of place, something I could dismiss, had transformed before my eyes. It was no longer a place of excitement or thrill. It had become something far darker. Every twisted act, every subtle shift in the air made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. There was a darkness here, seeping into everything, wrapping its tendrils around every corner of this grotesque place. The air in the tent had grown colder, the oppressive heat of the fire-breather's flames now just a faint memory. It felt as though the very walls of the tent were closing in on me, tightening with each passing second. My pulse quickened, my skin prickling with unease. I couldn't stay here. I needed answers. I needed to understand what was happening before it was too late. With a surge of panic, I turned toward the exit, but as I pushed through the crowd, I realized that something had changed. The audience, once entranced by the performers, was no longer moving. They stood frozen in place, their eyes glazed over, their faces slack and vacant. Their mouths hung open, their bodies unmoving, like marionettes whose strings had been severed. But what was even more disturbing was their silence. It wasn't as if they were merely watching the show. They were waiting for something. My heart hammered in my chest as I shoved my way through the motionless crowd, ignoring their hollow eyes, their breathless stares. I had to get out of here. I had to escape this madness before it consumed me too. But just as I reached the entrance, I felt a cold, familiar presence behind me. The ringmaster. "Leaving so soon, Miss Reeves?" His voice slithered into my mind, dark and smooth like oil. It reverberated in my chest, settling like a weight in my lungs. I turned, my legs heavy, unwilling to move as his shadow swallowed the light around us. He stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the opening, his crimson coat gleaming against the darkness like a predator in the night. "I've seen enough," I said, my voice trembling as I tried to force the words out. "This place, it's not real, it's just a trick. A show." The ringmaster's lips curled into a smile, wide and unsettling, stretching just a little too far to be natural. "Oh, but it is real, Miss Reeves. You see, this carnival, it's far older than you can imagine. It's not a performance, not a play, it's a way of life." My eyes narrowed, my mind reeling. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" The ringmaster tilted his head, the brim of his hat casting shadows over his face, but I could feel his eyes boring into mine, cold, predatory. "I am what you would call a conductor, a keeper of the game." He stepped forward, his movements fluid, almost gliding across the floor. "But I am not the only one. We are the shadows that exist between the moments, the cracks in the fabric of time, and this carnival is our feeding ground." My breath caught in my throat. Feeding ground? His smile widened. "Yes, Miss Reeves. The carnival feeds on emotions, fear, joy, lust, grief. Every scream, every laugh, every whispered wish, we harvest them all. The performers you've seen, they are not just entertainers, they are part of the harvest. Their souls have been twisted, bent to our will. They no longer remember who they once were." I shook my head, trying to grasp what he was saying. "That's impossible. No one can understand," he interrupted smoothly, his voice lilting with an almost amused tone at my disbelief. "You are just like the others, skeptical, unwilling to see what's in front of you until it's too late." His words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the tent pole for support, my knees shaking. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite myself. The ringmaster's expression softened, though the malice still clung to him like a storm cloud. "Oh, we don't want anything from you, not yet. You've already played your part, Miss Reeves. You've already come this far. You're part of the show now, whether you want to be or not." A chill ran through my veins as the weight of his words settled deep in my chest. The people here, they're not just watching, they're feeding, he finished for me. You see, Miss Reeves, this carnival isn't about entertainment, it's about the exchange. The more they indulge in their fear, their joy, the more they give. And what we take in return is precious. My mind raced as the pieces clicked together in a nightmare of understanding. The twisted acts, the performers who were more like living statues, the entranced crowd. They weren't here for fun. They were here to feed, to give up their essence, to be consumed. The carnival was a trap, and we were all lured into it, drawn in by the promise of thrills, only to be devoured in the end. My stomach twisted. And you control it all. You feed off us. You. The ringmaster's laugh was dark, low, and rich with malice. We all do, Miss Reeves. We are the shadows that cling to your world, and we feed on what you cannot see, what you cannot touch. We feed on the very thing that makes you human, your emotions. Fear, especially, is the sweetest of all. My thoughts spun wildly. But why? Why do you do this? His eyes gleamed with a glint of something ancient. Why? Because we are creatures of the void, Miss Reeves. We exist between the cracks, beyond the veil of your world. We are the void that feeds on the edges of reality, and once we take, we never give back. A deep, gnawing terror crawled up my throat. The truth was undeniable now, and as much as I wanted to run, to escape the hold of this carnival, I knew the ringmaster was right. I had already crossed the threshold. I had already given myself over to the carnival. The ringmaster stepped closer, his shadow stretching across me like a darkened veil. His hand reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against my cheek. Don't be afraid, Miss Reeves. It will all be over soon. You'll understand when you see the mirrors. I recoiled from his touch, but his voice lingered in my mind, echoing like the finality of a death sentence. You'll see, Miss Reeves, he whispered. You'll see. The carnival had become a living thing, a monstrous, suffocating presence that closed in on me, tightening with every passing moment. I could feel its heartbeat, a pulsing rhythm that echoed deep within my chest, pulling me toward something darker, something inevitable. My feet moved of their own accord, carried by a force I couldn't resist. The air around me was thick with the scent of burning sugar and rot, the sound of twisted laughter and music growing louder with each step. But none of that mattered anymore. The truth was clear now, as terrifying as it was. This was not a place of joy, not a place of entertainment. It was a prison, and I had walked willingly into its jaws. The ringmaster's words echoed in my mind, a cruel melody that wound its way through my thoughts. You've already played your part. You're part of the show now. My chest tightened, the weight of his words sinking in. He was right, I had come too far. But I wasn't ready to accept my fate. Not yet. There had to be a way to stop this, to break the carnival's hold before it claimed everyone in this town, before it consumed me too. The ground beneath my feet shifted, the earth trembling with a low, rhythmic hum. I spun around, my heart racing. In the distance I saw it, the central tent, its towering structure black against the violet sky. It was there that the ringmaster had led me, where all the twisted threads of the carnival converged. But it wasn't just a tent, it was the heart of the darkness, the very core of the carnival's power. It was time to end this. As I moved toward the tent, the crowd parted for me. Their eyes were still glassy, still vacant, but their movements were synchronized, each person moving like a marionette, each step mimicking the last. The performers had returned to their stations, frozen in place, their faces twisted in smiles that were too wide, too sharp. I felt their eyes on me, their unblinking stares digging into my skin like 1,000 pricking needles. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The ringmaster was waiting for me. He stood at the entrance to the central tent, his tall frame cloaked in darkness, his crimson coat seeming to drink in the light around him. His smile gleamed, predatory, stretching impossibly wide. He watched me approach, his eyes never leaving me, dark and hungry. "You've come to finish it, haven't you?" His voice was smooth, seductive, but underneath it I could hear the growl of something ancient, something hungry. I stopped just a few paces away, my pulse pounding in my ears. The air crackled with tension. "I'm not going to let you take anyone else," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "This ends now." The ringmaster's smile faltered, just for a moment before it returned, wider than before. "Ah, Miss Reeves, always the skeptic. Always so determined to find a way to break free. But you can't escape what you are." He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "You are already part of the carnival. You always have been." I took a deep breath, pushing the fear down into the pit of my stomach. "I'm not part of anything," I said through clenched teeth. "I'm not like you." The ringmaster laughed, a low, guttural sound that echoed through the carnival, shaking the very ground beneath me. "Oh, but you are, Miss Reeves. You're more like me than you know. All it takes is the right moment, the right choice." He stepped closer, his shadow enveloping me like a suffocating cloak. "And you've already made that choice." My mind raced. I had to act. Now there was no more time for doubt, no more time for second-guessing. I glanced around, desperate for anything that could give me an edge. My eyes landed on the central pole of the tent, its massive structure rising like a dark sentinel from the ground. The ringmaster's eyes followed my gaze, his smile never wavering. "You think fire can stop us? You think you can burn what has lived for centuries?" My gaze hardened. "It's the only way." Without hesitation, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a match I had taken from my coat. The tiny piece of wood felt impossibly small in my fingers, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I struck it against the rough fabric of my sleeve, the sharp sound of the match igniting, cutting through the thick silence. A spark. I held the match aloft, watching as the tiny flame grew, flickering and dancing in the darkness. The ringmaster's eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement, but I could see the tremor in his form, a ripple in the shadows around him. He was weakening. I took a deep breath and tossed the match onto the central pole. The flames caught immediately, devouring the canvas with a violent burst of heat. The fire roared to life, climbing up the pole and spreading outwards in a wave of destruction. The carnival trembled, its foundation quaking with the force of the flames. The ringmaster's eyes widened, his mouth opening in a silent scream, though no sound escaped. The carnival began to shake, its lights flickering erratically, the ground beneath my feet rippling like the surface of a pond disturbed by a stone. The air crackled with energy, the shadows around us twisting and writhing as if trying to escape the flames. "No!" the ringmaster hissed, his voice a low snarl of fury. "You cannot destroy us. We are eternal." But the fire spread faster than he could react, consuming the very essence of the carnival, its twisted magic fueling the flames. The performers writhed in agony, their contorted bodies twisting in impossible shapes as the fire reached them. The tense structure groaned, buckling under the weight of the flames. I stood firm, my face illuminated by the flickering light. I could hear the screams that weren't human, screams that seemed to echo from every corner of the carnival. The fire was cleansing, burning away the corruption, the darkness that had taken root in this place. The ringmaster's form flickered in the flames, his face contorting in pain. You can't kill what never dies." His voice was a growl now, filled with rage. My heart hammered in my chest, but I didn't waver. The fire was my answer. It had to be. With a final, guttural scream, the ringmaster's form dissolved into smoke, his figure disappearing into the inferno. The flames surged higher, consuming everything: the tents, the performers, the twisted essence of the carnival itself. And then, silence. I stood amidst the charred remains of the carnival, the heat still clinging to the air, the smell of burning canvas and ashes heavy in my nostrils. The ground beneath me was scorched, the remnants of the carnival's twisted creations reduced to nothing more than ashes and cinders. But as the smoke cleared, something caught my eye. A fluttering piece of paper, carried by the wind. I bent down to pick it up, my heart sinking as I recognized it. A flyer. The same flyer I had seen before, only this one was covered in soot and ash, its edges singed. The bold letters on the front read, "The Shadow Carnival." Now playing in Ashford. Tickets available. My blood ran cold. The carnival wasn't gone. It was merely moving on, feeding on new souls, ready to start the cycle again. The fire may have burned away the carnival's physical form, but the shadow it cast would always be there, waiting for the next town, the next victim. And in that moment I knew the battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The wind shifted, and with it came a new scent. Faint, but welcome. What had once been a suffocating silence, thick with the smell of burning sugar and ash, now carried the faint trace of fresh earth and rain. I stood amidst the wreckage, the charred remnants of the carnival surrounding me. The once vibrant tents were now nothing more than blackened, smoldering husks, their twisted shapes sagging under the weight of the fire's wrath. Above me, the sky was streaked with the last remnants of violet and orange as the sun began to rise. It felt like the world was changing, like the very air had been cleansed by the flames. But as the smoke cleared, a deep and haunting silence lingered. The heat still clung to the air, stinging my skin as I surveyed the destruction. The ground beneath me was scorched and cracked, the earth split by the intense heat of the flames. And yet, despite the devastation, something felt missing. The hum of the town was gone, the birds no longer sang, and the rustling of trees was absent. Everything felt still, frozen, like the world itself was holding its breath. The weight of the night settled on my shoulders, and the events of the last few hours pressed against me like an invisible force. My mind reeled, the adrenaline of the confrontation still racing through my veins, and yet there was something worse. A deep, gnawing sense of loss. A hollow space where the carnival had once been. Had I truly destroyed it? Or had I merely pushed it back into the corners of the world, setting it free to return elsewhere? Like a shadow that would never fade. I gripped the flyer in my hand, my fingers tightening around the singed edges. I couldn't take my eyes off the bold, dark letters that stared back at me. The Shadow Carnival, now playing in Ashford. Tickets available. My heart sank. My breath caught in my throat as the truth slammed into me. The carnival hadn't been destroyed. It had only been pushed away. Its hunger, its pull, it would return. It always did. I wasn't alone. A soft voice broke through my thoughts, brittle and fragile, like the first ray of light breaking through a storm cloud. I turned to find Lila standing behind me, her once vibrant costume now torn and singed, her face streaked with dirt and ash. But it was her eyes that struck me most, the haunting, hollow eyes that had seen too much, carrying the weight of 1,000 broken souls. "It's over, isn't it?" she whispered. I nodded, though the lump in my throat was too large to speak, too heavy to swallow. I glanced around at the ruins, the twisted remains of the performers who had been devoured by the flames, their screams long gone. And yet, despite the destruction, I still felt it. The air was different, thick with something unseen, a strange electric tension that hadn't dissipated. The carnival was gone, yes, but its shadow remained, flickering in the corners of my mind like a half-remembered nightmare. "It's not over," I said softly, my voice shaking as the weight of my realization settled over me like a blanket of ice. "We stopped it here, but it's not gone. It's still out there." Lila's eyes clouded with the same understanding that had come over me. "It's never gone, is it? The carnival never really leaves. It just moves." I tightened my grip on the flyer, its edges crinkling under my fingers. "It always comes back. It always finds a new place, a new town, a new set of souls to feast on." Lila's lips trembled as she glanced between the ashes and the horizon, where the first rays of sunlight were beginning to break through the dark clouds. "We can't stop it, can we? We can't destroy it forever." I didn't answer her, but the silence between us was answer enough. The weight of my words hung in the air like a bitter aftertaste. "No," I whispered, "we can't." But then, as the sky grew lighter, something shifted. I could feel it. Something subtle. Something just out of reach, like the change in the wind or the first sign of a storm on the horizon. It was as if the world was trying to breathe again, trying to heal itself. The air felt fresher, the ground beneath me more solid. The carnival, the nightmare that had taken root here, was gone. But its echo lingered, a scar on the land that would never fade. Ethan's voice broke the quiet. I turned, startled, to see him standing a few feet away, his hands on his hips, his eyes wide with a mixture of relief and confusion. "Is it really over?" he asked, his voice hoarse, as if he too had just woken from a long, terrible dream. I looked at him, a deep weariness settling into my bones. "No, it's just begun," I said, my voice steady but heavy. I could see the fear in his eyes, the fear of the unknown, of the evil that had slithered into our lives and left its mark on our town. The fire may have destroyed the carnival's physical form, but it hadn't erased what had happened. The town would remember, whether it wanted to or not. We all would. Lila nodded slowly, her face drawn but resolute. "We'll have to be ready. It'll come again. We have to be ready when it does." I could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on me like a suffocating force. "And we will be, because we can't let it take anyone else." The sound of footsteps broke the quiet again. I turned to see a few of the townsfolk emerging from the woods and houses, drawn by the smoke, the flames. They looked lost, confused, unsure of what they had witnessed. They had no idea what had truly happened, no idea of the darkness that had lurked among us. The memories of the carnival would fade, like so many forgotten nightmares. But I knew better. I would never forget. I glanced one last time at the smoldering ruins, the remnants of a place that should never have existed, and turned my back on it. I walked away, my steps steady but heavy, as though the weight of the world had settled on my shoulders. The sun was fully risen now, casting its light across the town, its warmth a fragile promise. A promise of something new, something fresh. But I knew the truth. The shadow carnival was out there, somewhere, waiting. And I would never be free of it. Not until it was stopped for good. And so, as the smoke of the carnival faded into the air, I made a silent vow. I would be ready. The next time the carnival came, I would fight, and this time I would win. But deep down, I knew. The real battle was only just beginning.